Coming up, it's all about fiscal drag. After Jeremy Hunt's damp squib of a tax-raising and cost-cutting budget this week, early indications are that it hasn't shifted the needle on the electorate's dissatisfaction with this incompetent, corrupt and extremist government one bit. According to the latest polling trends, the Tories could end up with a result that is worse than their previous worst ever defeat in 1997, when they won only 165 seats against Tony Blair's incoming government. In fact, many senior Tories today would be delighted if the party did anywhere near that well in the next general election. But is all this a bit optimistic? How likely is it that we'll see another Labour landslide? Stay tuned. If you're sad enough, like me, to feed the figures from this week's Ipsos poll, which put the Tories on a record low of 20% vote share, into the electoral calculus model, which is available at electoralcalculus.co.uk, you'll find that the Tories end up with 25 seats. But of course, the Ipsos result is just one poll, and to be fair, is the lowest of a range of estimates produced by recent polls. If we look instead at the overall polling averages, extrapolated from the last 3 weeks of polling, we see Labour on 43.6%, the Conservatives on 24.6%, and the Liberal Democrats on 9.8%. Should a general election be held today, this would likely lead to the following composition of the House of Commons. Tories on only 103 seats, down 273, Labour on 464 seats, up 267, Lib Dems up 33 to 41, and SNP down 30. This would leave Labour with a majority of 139. So you can see, even taking into account all the reputable opinion polls from the last 3 weeks, it's not good news for Sunak or the Tory party. If we take the average, Labour remain 19 points ahead, and the Tories are heading for a drubbing far worse than they suffered at the hands of Tony Blair. The average Labour lead has barely changed since Sunak became the Tories' third-choice Prime Minister. Indeed, it has actually widened slightly, and there's no evidence that the budget this week has made any difference whatsoever. According to current polling, Labour is on course to win seats in England that it has previously never won, within Tory strongholds like Dorset, Essex, Cheshire, the Isle of Wight, and in the Kent-London suburbs. For example, former Tory leader Ian Duncan Smith and the identity-shifting Defence Secretary Grant Shapps are just two amongst many of the fat cat big gun Tories that will be out on their arse losing their seats to Labour. And despite the lacklustre leadership of Ed Davey, who spectacularly failed to take up the gauntlet of speaking for the 48% who voted to remain in the European Union, the Liberal Democrats are, even so, on course to gain 32 seats from the Conservatives and 1 from the SNP. The Lib Dems are odds-on favourites to defeat the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, despite his personal £100,000 contribution to his local constituency branch campaign funds. Hunt will be joined as a Lib Dem scalp by Energy Secretary Claire Coutinho, Justice Secretary Alex Chalk, and the disgraced Science Secretary Michelle Donnellan, who should be dismissed after costing taxpayers $15,000 this week in damages to 2 academics she slanderously labelled as Hamas supporters. Sunak need look no further than his own cabinet if he's serious about weeding out the extremists. And talking of extremists, Reform UK Limited are now polling in the region of 12%, which will give them 0 seats. Hardly fair, but that's the first past the post system for you. Every cloud and all that. Meantime, support for the Green Party remains constant at around the 5% mark, and they can expect to double their seat count to 2. I was listening to the extremely likeable Natasha Clark, political editor at LBC, when she was talking to James O'Brien this week, and she's of the opinion that at 20%, the Tories are at bedrock. She doesn't believe they can go any lower, which kind of implies that the only way for the Tories is up. It's also usually true that once the general election campaign is officially underway, the polls do tend to narrow a bit. With the Tories recently enacting legislation allowing an 80% increase in party spending limits, the amount from their war chest that they'll be able to spend has gone from £19.5 million to £35 million. Donations to the Conservative Party dwarf those to the other parties, so this latest of many Tory cheats, see my recent video on that subject, will allow them to massively outspend the opposition and perhaps shrink the poll gap during the campaign. This is the Americanisation of the UK political process, where money increasingly talks. It's the Tory way, as with their plans to Americanise the NHS and the prison system. But a massive ad campaign isn't guaranteed to work. Core Tory voters, middle class, in well-paid jobs, are still coming off fixed-rate mortgages to find themselves paying substantially more in mortgage repayments thanks to Brexit, Kwarteng and Truss, and 14 years of Tory misrule. While a large majority of voters are still telling pollsters that they feel worse off now than they were at the 2019 election, and indeed worse off over the whole period of Conservative-led government, going right back to Call Me Dave Cameron and the start of his vindictive and dogmatic austerity policy in 2010. Added to that we're in a recession, Brexit problems are not being addressed. The NHS and court waiting lists get ever longer. Shit is still being pumped into our rivers and coastal waters. Energy bills are still at eye-watering, historically high levels, leading to mega profits being made by the Tories' best friends, the fossil fuel corporations. And fiscal drag means that the tax burden on the electorate will continue its trend to very soon pass levels not seen since the 1960s. Given all that and much more, it seems that Natasha Clark's theory that the Tory vote can't go below 20% will be put to the test. The Ipsos poll that I mentioned at the start of this video recorded the lowest share of the Tory vote since Ipsos began polling in 1978. But the 27-point lead it gives Labour wasn't the widest it's had. The average Labour lead in opinion polls with field work in the week in which Liz Truss left office was 31 points, and it's that gap between the two main parties that's the more important statistic. And that brings us on to tactical voting, which has been gaining a lot of awareness in recent years and has been seen to great effect in several by-elections since 2019. The tacticalvote.co.uk website is entitled Unite Against the Tories, and I recommend a visit to this site to anyone watching who has a UK vote. Just go to the site, enter your postcode or constituency, and tacticalvote.co.uk will advise you which way to vote to have the best chance of securing a defeat for the Tories. It's the best democratic antidote to the antiquated and fixed FPTP system with its built-in bias in favour of the Tories. With tactical voting, the Labour victory over the Tories could be even more massive than is indicated in the current polls. The bigger the victory, the more scope that gives for critical, radical voices within the Labour Party to speak out and stand up to the leadership on Middle East policy, green investment, reform of the Lords, proportional representation, EU membership, and a tax system that doesn't penalise earned income more than unearned income. I maybe sound a bit too enthusiastic about a big Labour win for some of you, and I really don't want to lose viewers who are part of what George Galloway called the two cheeks of the same arse persuasion when it comes to Starmer's Labour and the Tories. I do get it. The cautiousness of Labour's economic and spending commitments is incredibly frustrating, as is their misguided policy on the Middle East and other policies that just seem to shadow the Tories at this stage in the election cycle. It's just, I'd rather have all the arguments about Starmer and Labour policies after the election. The priority right now is to get the Tories out, and I can't get my head around the Galloway/Owen Jones argument of don't vote for Starmer, he's a red Tory. Under our first past the post system, that's as good as a vote for 5 more years of corrupt, cruel, incompetent and extreme right-wing government from the actual Tories, the nasty party. They say, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And I would add to that, don't let the perfect be the enemy of any improvement on these rotten, incompetent and corrupt Tories. It's only once in government that policies make any difference. And even a centrist-dominated Labour Party will be a step forward and an improvement on the current extremist government. And it's after a Labour victory that the real fight on meaningful policies begins. That's what I sincerely believe. You may disagree with me. Leave a comment down below.